Hello, okay, so the basis of the video is going to be around the constitutional change, the amendment process regarding the US Constitution. They haven't asked a 30 marker on this, and I think a likely question, given the fact for the exam you need to know about the advantages and disadvantages of the system. I think it's going to be along the lines of evaluate the view that the constitutional amendment process is fit for purpose in the USA, or is suitable for the USA, or it might be the negative view of that particular statement. I have used the Andrew Colclough book, this one, as the basis of this video, because I thought he had some quite good points to make. So firstly, obviously introduction to make your arguments, you think it is fit for purpose or not. You need to try and avoid being descriptive in the essay, and obviously you need to analyse, don't you? Is it fit for purpose or is it not fit for purpose? And you need to discuss a range of different amendments as well. Don't just mention one or two, and don't just describe one or two either. You need to have a range of them. So, to do this, Andrew Colclough's book had three themes, which I thought were quite good themes as the basis, like our criteria for measuring whether these amendments have been suitable or fit for purpose or not. So the three themes, which I'm going to use as three themes, because I thought they were quite good. His first theme, which would be paragraph 1, is does the amendment system allow a balance between continuity and protecting the key principles of the Constitution, but also enabling change to take place to make it fit into the modern world. Paragraph 2 will be has the amendment system protected and even enhanced the democratic system in the United States and allowed the Constitution to protect democracy, or has it in some way undermined the democratic system? And then the third one's a bit tricky. Andrew had, which I thought quite a good one, about this idea: does the amendment process provide the right balance between the judiciary interpreting the Constitution and elected politicians interpreting that Constitution? So I thought there were three quite good themes, so that's come with the basis. I haven't really thought what my argument's going to be. I'm going to argue that the constitutional amendment process does a great job. That's going to be my argument. Most of the essay is going to be about the formal amendment processes, the 2/3 and 3/4 and stuff. But the last paragraph enables you to discuss informal amendments, because basically every time the Supreme Court makes a judgment based on the Constitution, they're interpreting those words. So my argument's going to be, what I'm going to say now, my argument's going to be that the amendment process does a good job, basically. Okay, so theme number 1 then is, does the amendment process allow the right balance between continuity, protecting key principles of the Constitution as set out by the Founding Fathers, but also enabling much needed change? And of course my argument is yes, it does. So I'm going to argue that the difficulty of amending the Constitution has enabled the key principles of checks and balances, limiting government through things like federalism, the separation of powers. It's protected these key principles. No president has been able, have they, to get round separation of powers and appoint members of his cabinet or the judiciary without having to go to the US Senate to get their approval. Checks and balances are still pretty much in place. I know it's a whole different essay about how effective they are, but by and large the Founding Fathers recognised those checks and balances, and you could argue that they have allowed and enabled, haven't they, those three branches to grow together and balance each other out. And so the amendment, if you like, changes to be made to these key principles. However, you could say it has also allowed change to take place. So not only has it protected and created continuity and protected some of the key features of the Constitution, but it's also enabled change to take place as well. It's enabled this Constitution to live and breathe into the modern world by enabling those changes. So there's been changes, for example, in terms of democracy in America, so allowing kind of certain people the vote. So like the 1971, that amendment, which was the 26th Amendment, if memory serves me right, enabled 18-year-olds the right to vote. So it was updating, if you like, the principles of the Constitution, in this case, who could vote. So that'd be one example of that. So it's protected the key principles, but it's also enabled change to happen as well. Now, the counterpoint to this will be it hasn't, okay? It has not protected key principles, and actually it's enabled an outdated constitution. It's enabled relics of the past to survive into the modern world because they're too hard to change. So in terms of this side of the argument, you could say, well, actually, how effective are these principles? You know, presidents have found ways around, haven't they, some of these checks and balances. The Constitution hasn't been amended to perhaps tighten up, you know, control of the presidency regarding foreign policy, you know, and the right to declare war being, you know, largely ineffective these days. It's enabled, hasn't it, the other key principles to be undermined regarding things like limited government, and, you know, the fact the federal government in DC arguably has grown much too big at the expense of many of the states. So that principle of limited government is being undermined. You could argue that the Constitution, because the amendment system is so hard, you've got many bits of the Constitution which are kind of relics of the past, perhaps undemocratic elements. So, for example, you've got things like the Electoral College, which I'm going to discuss more in the next paragraph, this anarchic system for electing the president. Look at the debate around guns and gun rights. Again, it comes down to the Second Amendment of the Constitution, the right to bear arms and have a well-regulated militia. Liberals believe that this was fine in 1787 when, you know, it took half an hour to load a gun. That's a slight exaggeration. Is it really what the Founding Fathers had in mind, with people running around with semi-automatic weapons, etc., etc.? And it's enabled reform and change of the gun regulations and the subsequent deaths and stuff in America as a consequence. And this is down to the fact the Constitution is proving really difficult to change and amend. So they're the 2 points here. Now my view is actually it does a good job of protecting these key principles. It has allowed enough space for them to live and breathe, but hasn't undermined these actual principles themselves. And in fact, some of the amendments which have taken place have perhaps cleared up areas which originally were a little bit ambiguous, a little bit vague. So, for example, the 25th Amendment in 1967, it cleared up what to do if the president was incapacitated in some way. So that not dead. What's the line of succession if a president is assassinated? You know, clearly this was made 4 years after JFK's death. There've been a number of other assassinations of other political figures around this period. They clearly want to clear up the line of succession and what would happen in that scenario. So that'd be an example of it being changed and altered, but to actually make it more effective and to make it clearer on certain things. So protects key principles and enables change, which I think is a stronger argument than the one that actually it's allowed a constitution not to protect the key principles and become outdated. You might think I'm completely wrong in my argument, you might think it's the other way around, which I'm half wondering about actually now I've just done this, but I want to stick to my guns. Okay, next paragraph, I'm going to look at, does it provide sufficient protection of democracy? And I'm going to argue, yes it does. The Constitution, and the fact it's difficult to amend, has protected, but it's also enhanced democracy in the USA. Firstly, the constitutional arrangements originally allowed for a president who would be elected via the Electoral College. It provided for a House of Representatives, which would have elections every 2 years. These things have continued. We know the exact dates of elections in America for the next 200, 300 years. I guess assuming the Constitution survives that long. It's allowed these constitutional arrangements, these democratic arrangements, to also be enhanced. There have been constitutional amendments which have enhanced democracy in the United States. So I mentioned earlier, 1971 constitutional amendment allowed 18-year-olds the right to vote. 1913, the 17th Amendment enabled senators in the second chamber to be elected directly by the people, something we still haven't managed in the UK in terms of our second chamber. And so the Constitution has protected elections in America. No president will be able to get rid of the midterm elections, etc., etc. Even if Donald Trump might want to in 12 months' time. But it's also enhanced that democracy. You could also, if you wanted to, point out that any changes to the Constitution are actually also democratic because they require a supermajority. They require a majority of American people, by a large majority, to agree to these changes. So, for example, some of the things which have failed to be amended, these failures of amendments, is down to the fact that they did not have sufficient support from enough groups in America. So, for example, many liberals and many people in the city of Washington DC wished there to be a constitutional amendment to give that city statehood. But this clearly benefits one side, i.e. the Democrats, who would gain 2 Democrat senators more than likely in the Senate, and therefore it hasn't got very far because it doesn't have appeal from a wide variety of the American people. The failure to ban flag burning as well, pretty popular amongst many politicians, but not quite enough to actually make it as a constitutional amendment. Again, it failed in terms of that supermajority, and therefore you might say that's fine, that is democratic. Okay, if you're going to change the Constitution, it needs to have a higher threshold than perhaps just a simple majority vote to ensure that everyone, or the vast majority of people, are quite happy with that changes. And therefore I would say it's done its job. Okay, it has allowed democracy to improve in America at a similar time rate and even quicker than the UK, for example. It has allowed constitutional amendments which have taken place to ensure they've got widespread support from both the states and from the central government, and therefore the amendment system has done a great job. However, the counter-argument would be, actually no, the difficulty of amending the Constitution has actually allowed undemocratic elements to survive. The Electoral College, the fact the Americans don't directly elect their head of state still, the fact they have to go through this Electoral College, which gives powers to certain elites, may have been fine in 1787. It may have been quite forward thinking for 1787, when most countries, like Britain and stuff, had an unelected monarch. Not so good today. Okay, the Electoral College would require a constitutional amendment to change, basically, or get rid of it. Isn't going to happen because too many states and individuals have got vested interest in the current system. There's been many amendments which have been suggested, which have been really popular but have failed because they haven't quite achieved this really high bar, which you might say is an unrealistic bar. So take the flag burning amendment in 2006. It failed. It failed by 1 vote in the US Senate. A big majority of members of the House of Reps supported it. As I said, 1 vote short in the Senate. So the vast majority of politicians supported it, but a minority, which was 1, prevented it from passing. The Equal Rights Amendment, given equal legal status, because that's hard to say, for women, okay, in the late 1970s, failed because 13 states out of a total of 50 did not support that amendment. These 13 states made up around about a quarter of the American people. So, and even then, within those 13 states, there probably would have been a significant number of people who would have wanted this amendment. So, again, a popular amendment didn't quite meet the threshold, and therefore didn't happen. And therefore, you could say this is not democratic. It's tyranny of the majority. A very small select group are preventing change, much needed change, supporters would say. And therefore, it is not protecting democracy. Now, my argument, though, is the other side, remember. I think that's a weak argument. I think, well, yeah, but if it was really that popular, it would get passed. There's been other amendments that have been passed. Perhaps they need to work on those states which have got concerns and try and address those concerns if they want to get flag burning through or want to get Equal Rights Amendment through. The Constitution has protected democratic elements in the UK, in the USA. You know, there will be a midterm election in November 2026, whether Trump wants one or not. There will be another presidential election in 2028. Trump won't be able to stand in that election because he's done his 2 terms. These things are protected, and the fact you have this supermajority ensures they're protected as well. And finally, is this one about politicians versus judges. This is probably a bit more on the informal process of amending the Constitution. Every time the Supreme Court interprets this Constitution, they're in effect making an amendment. Okay.